All right, welcome everyone to our Global Read webinar series. I am so excited to be able to be here with author Willie Edward Taylor Carver Jr. with his book Gay Poems for Red States. Because even though Pride Month just finished, we still got some more Pride to share with everybody else. So I'm going to be the moderator today for our conversation. So I am extremely glad to be able to be the interviewer today because I feel like in many ways I felt very identified with the book that I just read about, the red state, I mean the gay poems for red states. So first of all, I wanted to introduce Willie very quickly to everyone. Willie Carver Jr. is not only from Kentucky, from the Appalachia, but he is the author of this book. He's an advocate. He was the Kentucky Teacher of the Year in 2022, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Hmm.
He's the author of many books, and he also a big advocate that works. He's the director of KY120, United AFT LGBTQ plus task force, and he has lobbied and fought against anti-LGBTQ legislation targeting children. And his work is all over. He is also a speaker. He goes around the country talking about important issues that affect our community. Willie, thank you so much for joining us during this time and for, having the willingness to have a conversation with us and with everybody else that is watching us.
Oh, thank you. And I promise you the honor is all mine. I love the work that you're doing and love seeing how a concept as big as compassion can be woven into pretty much anything anyone's doing if they're working for good. So
Absolutely.
thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. And why don't we talk a little bit about yourself before we get into the book? And I mean, I guess it could be like a mixed conversation because the book really is very much autobiographical, right? Like there's a lot going on that talks about you growing up in Appalachia and Kentucky, being a gay kid and everything. So do you want to tell us a little about yourself?
Yeah. So I grew up in a holler in Appalachia, to really hardworking, decent human beings. But hard work is not enough in the United States. It's not enough in a lot of places. The average income, the median income in the town near where I'm from, because I'm not from a town, is about $13,000 a year for a family. So I was a child of a coal miner and a nurse's aide. And despite how hard they worked, there were times when we didn't have basic things like running water, like electricity, like food. But school was always this magical place that had all those things. Um, School was just magic to me. So I always knew that I wanted to be a teacher. Because who doesn't want to be magical? Who doesn't want to be a part of this new. I almost used a Harry Potter reference instead of room of requirement, but I won't. We'll find some new things.
We can come up with something else. Yes.
Yes. But that brought me into education, and I taught for 15 years. I'm terrible with numbers. Numbers don't matter to me, but
No
around
worries.
15 years, I believe. And I'm obviously big and gay and Appalachian. And so for a long time, it was difficult, but not impossible. And it was worth fighting to get to places that I thought I deserved because of how wonderful those places were. But in the last 10 years, that fighting has become increasingly impossible. And that impossibility sort of culminated when I was teacher of the year, which was unheard of for a gay teacher in a red state. I thought it was spam. There are 40,000 teachers in Kentucky. And I was getting these emails and I thought, there's no way this is real. Teacher, winner, me, no. Because a lot of my administrators fought with me a lot. I think a lot of my presence in the school was spent advocating for Black youth, brown youth, LGBTQ youth in ways that sort of butted against what administrators wanted, which was to silence people, to ban books. And so, very long story short, when I did win, I didn't stop being who I was. I made it a point to keep talking about LGBTQ youth and brown youth. And that created the problems, or at least the hatred around that created the problems. And so in short, I don't even need to say what happened. I'm a gay teacher in the United States. This was at the absolute forefront of the groomer narrative coming back. So there were lots of attacks, first against me and then against my students. And when I say attacks, I mean death threats against students, threats against them, their pictures being shared. My former students, even their after school jobs, people were sort of suggesting that there was something inappropriate about these students and me, which led me to leave education. And in the 3 years since, I've put all of that energy into sort of knocking down classroom walls and trying to envision what teaching can look like if I'm doing it, to 300 million people at once. And so that's sort of where I am now.
That's amazing. Thank you for that. Just to give a little bit of context to people that might not be from the US. Red states, as probably most people, think red states because it means that they're leaning more into the conservative realm of things, right? So more anti-gay or anti-diversity or, things that happen to it. And so for a gay teacher to win the, you know, Teacher of the Year award in a very conservative state, it really is incredible. But we did see that, you did receive a lot of, instead of feeling probably validated by that award or maybe like supported, it felt like maybe it was kind of like the opposite, huh? The attacks started like coming up
Mhm.
more and everything.
Yeah, and I don't even want to downplay the validation because there were so many people trying to do something good. Um, but we're treading new territory. The United States is seeing a resurgence in a type of us versus them mentality, a sort of fascism from a populist place. And so, what that often means is before I get to be a human, I have to be categorized. And if I'm in the category that's a problem, um, then that erases my humanity. So, yeah, the reason I decided to really try as hard as I did is that one of my students, the students found out that I had been nominated, and these are high school students. So they thought that it was hilarious, and they made fun of me constantly. Um,
Why?
because they're students, and that's what students do, and that's what I love.
True, true. Never mind.
So I would misspell a word on the board, and the students will go, "Teacher of the Year here." Um, and in one of those moments, one of the students, after we had all laughed, said, "Yeah, like they're going to let some big gay Appalachian be Teacher of the Year," and we all laughed. But then that night, I just kept thinking about her words, and this was a 17-year-old girl who was gay and who was Appalachian. And for some context for any global listener, Appalachian it's a rural identity that sort of gets associated with poverty, ignorance, closed-mindedness. And I told myself this student has already told herself that there are things she'll never be, that there are things she'll never win. And she's only 17. And we can't have that. We can't have students believing that they can't do anything, not when they're that young. So I actually invited the students to fill the application out with me. And so I asked them, here's the question, what would you like to show about what you've been doing here at the school? Because these students were great. They had created a club called Open Light, and its goal was positive systemic change. So they did things like clean parks, raise money for mental health awareness. They won a $10,000 grant to have a rural LGBTQ youth summit and build an LGBTQ Black Brown centered library.
Wow.
These kids also realized that there was no explicitly safe space for LGBTQ youth. So they changed the name of their club to Open Light, an LGBTQ affirming club, period.
Oh, that's amazing.
So that they could still focus on doing positive things, but there could be no question that this club was open. And it was them. It was their work. It was their belief, because I had to let these students know, I believe I can win this. And it was, I think, their hopeful imagination as we filled out this application, as they wrote my letters of recommendation, because I wasn't going to ask administrators. That's what made it happen.
Mm.
And that answered a lot of questions in my mind about how the world works. We tell ourselves stories about what can be and can't be. And somehow I was able, through their story of what could be, to change my own life.
Wow. Thank you, Willie.
Thank you.
Reading through the different poems, something that you just mentioned kind of like came to my head about usually when gay kids or queer kids in general, right? We're doing queer kids in general. When queer kids are raised in places like Appalachia, where it's very open-minded about different characters. You have to fit a mold, and whatever's outside of that is odd, or people are afraid of it almost. I feel like a lot of kids that grow up that way in those places tend to run away from those places as soon as they can. Like as soon as they graduate high school, it's like, peace out, I'm going to the big city, I'm gonna finally live and whatever. And even reading through your poems, the toughness of living there, your specific situation with your family, where surviving with food stamps. And I have to tell you, it touched me so hard when you were telling me, when you were writing about your mom and the pancakes. That was very touching. And it gave me a perspective of how rough it must have been growing up in that situation. And yet here you are, after enduring so much, going to college, getting degrees, educating yourself in so many ways, you came back. You went back. Tell me a little bit more about that process. Like, what was it that inspired you to take that monumental step on your life?
And thank you for caring so much about what you were reading. And I think I might answer it in two different ways.
Hmm.
One is, we might use the word intersectionality, but one of the things I learned as I was being educated is how much discrimination people had against where I came from. That they would want me to change my accent or my voice. And what I would imagine in that moment where a professor is telling me, if you don't change how you talk, you'll never get a job, is my grandfather. And I would think, why is he not worthy for this? Like, why do I have to erase him to fit in here? And I think about trying to live in those other places, where I learned very quickly, that the way I presented myself as someone from the region I'm from was sort of a joke. Uh, that if I were going to be taken seriously, I would need to change sort of who I was for them. And then I thought, where do I go? Um, I wish I remembered his name, an Iranian author who won the overall Stonewall Book Award for, I think, fiction in 2024. And he said something very similar, that often Iranian queer youth are told, if your family doesn't accept you, run away and go to the cities. And he goes, and what do we find in these cities? We find rich, white, gay men who tell us that the Iranian side of us isn't good enough. And the end of the day, there's nowhere that you can go. And so that sort of shifts how you think about where you're going to be. The other thing that I think about is, what would be easier, to convince most coastal or city dwelling American progressives to treat people from Appalachia as if they were serious and they mattered, or to convince Appalachians that LGBTQ people mattered? And I think the second is going to be easier for me, because I think often, and I say this as a person who would on any litmus test come off as liberal and progressive. I think sometimes the people who set the rules and the standard for what is good or right, don't see their own flaws, I guess. And I think people who are often sort of, on the end that needs to change more. They sort of
Yeah.
recognize those a little more easily. And then to go back to the pancakes, um, there's this idea of communion that I think exists in a lot of different spiritual practices and religions. This idea that you can come together with someone and eat with someone, and that has some significance. For some Christians, it's very spiritual. Even the word itself, of the word friend, comrade, copain, sort of comes from Latin to mean to have bread with. And it occurs to me, I had communion with people when I was 6, when I was 7, with people who loved me, who might not love me now. And I can still nourish myself on that communion. Um, and so I guess it's for their sake. It's for these young kids' sakes. It's for a lot of these sakes.
Thank you. Yeah. And how interesting to bring this up about, maybe receiving this sort of like discrimination and bullying or whatever where you grew up, but then receiving a different kind of bullying and discrimination in a place that you thought that might be escape or a safe haven, like a liberal city, educated city, and being categorized in a way hurts. And I have personally experienced that because being born and raised in Chile, speaking Spanish, coming to the States, even though I have a college degree in education and everything, as soon as people hear sometimes my accent, there is an instant, I think, thought process in people saying like, "Oh, this guy's dumb," or "This guy is
Mhm.
not smart." And so I feel you on that. With, one of your poems that I thought that was so, well, all of them are so beautiful, but this one was so interesting was when you were talking about the library and how books became your escape and you could become anyone. And I love that you brought I could become girls, like the black girl, the trans girl, like all these different characters. How this process led you to become a teacher, and did you read your whole life like after your little moment there when you were younger in the library? Like how did this develop?
It I always read as the smallest version of me. I can remember so vividly the stories in our books in first grade and second grade. I can see to this day the full cover of the textbook that we used in first grade. Um, and there were snowmen ice skating on it. But for me, I could see these faraway places, these lives that were lived so different from my own, but recognize the humanity of the person speaking. And there was something so magical about that as a kid, that told me just how big this world was, um, and excited me about what I might learn from people. I remember um, second grade. This would have been second grade, and we read a story. It's actually funny about how we speak, I don't know, inappropriate ways about groups and use the terms that they use. So I actually was writing about him, this boy who ate hominy, and he was so proud of his mom's hominy. Um, that when I was writing Gay Poems for Ed States, I actually bought that book from first grade or second grade to read through it. And he called himself Woodland Native. So I used that phrase in the book. And then in our sensitivity reading, one of the editors was like, that's not an appropriate word anymore. Um, and I thought, how funny that I spent all of this time and energy trying to find the exact word that he used.
And you
Um,
can use
but for me, like that's emblematic of all of it. That I
oh,
He told me about hominy, and I wanted to taste hominy. I wanted to know what it was. I wanted to feel what life felt like for him in some kind of way. And anything I know about justice and resistance and dignity, I learned from Black women. Um, Toni Morrison, the way that she not only tells these stories, but the way she talks about how she writes them. Um, she considers truth a river, and we sometimes push the waters of the river out of the way to make room for something else. And she says, and sometimes the water returns and we call that a flood, but it was never a flood. It's water knowing where it's supposed to be. And so when she talks about emotionality and why we can trust our emotions, she's talking about that flood that comes when someone tells the boy from Chile or the queer boy from Appalachia, you should be this, you're not that, and we instinctively know it. So books gave me all of that. Permission to be bigger, permission to see other people as bigger.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit about. I realized that in the book there's a lot of influences of different teachers throughout your life, and and you know, as I was reading that, I thought myself of some of my teachers that really were supportive, that were special, that made me feel different, that saw me as I was, you know. And can you expand maybe a little bit more on that and like the importance of that safety, of that support, especially for children?
Yeah. And what a good question. And it makes me so happy to know that you were thinking of your teachers as you were reading. Um, when I began this book, it was during the ugliness, is the easiest way to say it. Um, I was frustrated that my students were in danger and that I was in danger. I was also in contact with lawyers at the time because I had um, community members sort of attacking me for being queer and a teacher.
Excuse me,
And
really quickly. When did you start writing the book? Was it after your award?
yes,
Okay.
so
So
it's literally in this moment that the attacks are happening and I'm being silent because the lawyers tell me don't speak at all, don't respond. And I think one of the things that was so painful is I remembered school as this magical, safe place. And this little boy inside of me, I think, was frustrated at school not being safe. And I think he was also frustrated that I was silent. Um, and in I'm writing an email to my superintendent and I'm explaining how furious I am that the school hasn't done more to protect our students. And a poem starts happening in the body of the email. It's one of those Toni Morrison floods, like I can't stop it. So I start writing it, and before I know it, I've got 30 lines and I have to move it somewhere else. And
wow.
that poem ended up being the first poem in the book, Minnie Mouse Toy. Um, and I think what happened, because I didn't know what was happening, is this little boy was so furious at me. And I think that's the right word. I think a lot of adults, I think especially adults who have gone through trauma, and I think often queer adults, we try to put as much space between our adult selves and our child self as we possibly can because we think of that child as vulnerable and weak, and we don't want to be that. And this child was speaking to me across 30 years saying, you thought I was weak? Are you kidding me? You're the one who's silent right now. And do you not remember everything I did? Do you not remember everything I did to get us right where we are right now? And he wanted to make sure I didn't forget. So this book was really him speaking and me giving him space to do it. Thank you, Felipe.
And you know, oh, excuse me. It's
We're
interesting.
not afraid of emotions here.
Yeah, right. And it's true, you know, like we do separate ourselves from that previous version of us because we feel like either it wasn't our true authentic self, or we were weak, or we were vulnerable, we weren't loud, we weren't proud. And so it's hard to like put those together again. And what a beautiful way to recognize that inner child in you, you know, screaming for safety and screaming for you to do something. What a beautiful thing. Inspiring. So, so inspiring.
And to get to learn from them too. Um, and the sad thing is there are other reasons. It's this. I know that it's not in every culture, but in the United States, there's this sort of stereotype that still exists that suggests something nefarious about the existence of gay adults, even talking about children. Um, for example, on the cover of my book is this shape of a child's face. When I shared the cover of the book, um, this is actually based upon a photo of me. It's not the actual photo, but the shape of the hairline, the ears, the photo they chose looks like the one of me, intentionally. And so I sort of proudly share my first book ever online. And on Twitter, all of these people come and start saying, "Why is there a child on the cover of your book, you groomer, you sick person?" And I thought, how telling and how important is a book when I'm being accused of grooming my own childhood. And I was then thinking about how often the external world forces us to put our own childhood away because it will shame us if we even pretend it existed. But I was a queer child. Um, the other people knew it. The other kids knew it in second grade. That's why they taunted me. That's why they tortured me. And the same people who tortured me when I was a kid now deny that queer childhood exists.
Uh, yeah. With that, so I remember one of the poems that you were saying, like, how people recognize that you were gay before you even understood that. When did you come to terms with your sexuality? Because one of the things that I noticed is like, most gay literature, at some point there will be like the come out story, or like they come to terms with the situation. And I noticed that in the poems, like there were periods of before and after, and not so much like the process of, recognizing, understanding, owning, and so when did this process happen? When
Mhm.
did you become aware? When did you sort of like come out, or when you feel more comfortable with yourself? How did that go for you?
And one, I've not had anyone point it out so clearly the way you just did, but I think it actually felt very much like the way the story happens. It's that, and even in the poem Jerry Springer, I reference being 9 years old and writing "I'm gay" and then burning it, um, because I knew in first grade that I liked boys, specifically Brandon. He went on to become a firefighter.
Brandon.
Oh, Brandon. Um, and it didn't occur to me that I was gay. One, because I didn't have language for it. Um, because no one, the closest to language I had was being shamed for wanting a Minnie Mouse car. So I knew there was something shameful, uh, in a lot of ways, about women. Um,
Uh-huh,
it's
totally.
yeah, it's that my society was telling me there's nothing worse than being a woman. And if you in any way act like a woman, talk like a woman, you should feel bad about yourself. And so I just knew that I had a crush, but I didn't even know about straight crushes exactly. And once I did start realizing them, I couldn't figure out how to explain to myself even what I was. And then in church, I would hear about these horrific monsters and was told that gay people were these monsters. And so at first I thought, well, then I can't be gay because I don't think I'm a monster. And I think there was a slow period where, to make sense of myself in the world that existed, I at some point even said, well, I guess I am. I am a monster. And what does that mean? And I think there's a lot of children who believe that they're monsters. And that's why it's so important for us to counter those narratives. But in terms of fully, I guess, accepting it, I came out well on what happened to be National Coming Out Day. It's either
Oh,
October 1st or 11th, but I have it written somewhere in a journal, to my friend Carrie, uh, in college, first semester. And then it took a full year before I spoke to a gay person. Because I think I thought they were all like in a club and they all knew the
the
codes
mean
and the
girls that
secrets.
like, yeah, you have to like admit yourself first, yeah.
So it was actually my straight roommate who was like, I can't stand this. You need to talk to other gay people because you deserve happiness. So he like goes online to try to find like, does anyone know any gay people? And he messages me a semester later after he has gone home, and he says, "There's a drag queen in your English class."
Ah, that's amazing.
And I was like, "How do I know?" And he said, He said you'll know by his eyebrows. So I go to class and immediately see like high trimmed eyebrows and get a wave. And that went on to be my friend Zach, and we're still friends 20 years later.
That's
Um,
amazing. That's amazing. What a beautiful roommate. Honestly, a
yeah, he's
true straight ally, huh?
yes, and we're still friends, and he was wonderful and is wonderful.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So the same way that we have this allies in the straight world or realm or whatever, we also have a lot of different people and institutions that tend to attack our very existence. And I think I'm trying to refer more to religion, specifics to Christianity here in the US. For people that don't know a lot about Appalachia and that area, it's a very Christian area. Very, very Christian, very close-minded to other religions as well, right? How and I saw that it impacted plenty of your poetry because there's lots of it that comes from preachers, the
Mhm.
pews and playing with the cars and what you were saying, like feeling that maybe you were a demon and touching yourself to feel the horn. W- what role did religion play in your life as a child, and does it play any role now?
Um, you know, one of the things, that have something really beautiful that gets to happen is that a lot of people bring their kids to readings. And I get to meet a lot of queer youth, sometimes 10, 11 years old, who've read my books. Um, and I was in Eastern Tennessee, which is also uh, very much like where I come from. And there was maybe an 11-year-old boy there. And he said, "Do you still have God in your life?" And I could sense a deep worry on his part about what my answer would be. Um, and I hadn't known how clear the answer would be in my head until he asked. But I grew up Pentecostal, and the version of Pentecostal that I was in sort of held that there was no truth in sort of an essential sense in the text itself of the Bible. There was no truth on the earth, not in institutions or organizations or men. Truth was this sort of feeling that you felt inside that you would get as a confirmation from a spirit. Um, and the truth is, we were taught you'll know when you've done something wrong because you'll feel it. I've never felt condemned for being gay. I've never felt anything wrong with love. And the other thing that church gave me was the Bible. And so I've read it many, many times, and I've looked at this Christ figure that the church is built on. And I realized he has absolutely nothing to say in any negative way about love. Um, so they gave me the tools to survive them, is what I'll say. And I think of, I think when we talk about love, when we talk about hearts and souls, these are such deeply woven into us. These concepts are so deeply woven into us in so many parts of our lives that it's really hard to have the language to talk about it. And so for me, often Christianity is the language that I can use, especially when I'm talking to people who I know espouse it. Um, I can use a lot of different languages for a lot of different things, but it is a language that I use for love. As far as religion, personally, it's just too hard for me, but I don't think that makes it wrong.
Mhm.
Um, my husband joined for a brief period of time the Episcopal Church, which is an LGBTQ affirming church, and the people were lovely. And I went and tried once to sit through a service, and I think for me, it's the tools that they're using for worship, which are beautiful from an objective standpoint, have been used to harm me so many times that it's hard for me to take those tools and do something beautiful with them in that moment. But what I did was cooked for them. They needed someone to make breakfast. And the average age of the congregant was probably 75. So I was
Yeah.
happy to get up every morning at 6 a.m. and go make breakfast for people. And I would watch them eat bacon and sausage and grits. And it brought me a lot of joy. And I thought, this is enough for me. This is enough church for me.
Yeah. Do you feel, and maybe this is personal, so don't, you don't need to answer this, but like, do
I
you
am an open book.
do you feel inclined, at least in like some sort of like a spirituality sense? Like, is there something bigger than this? Like, is there a connectivity or something?
I think
Your thoughts.
I think when you've received the last bit of bread someone has, it's impossible to be a nihilist. Um, I think a memory that will prevent me from ever not believing there's something more is my grandfather's sister. So this woman was born in the early 1900s. She lived in a house made of cement blocks that didn't have electricity, or maybe it had electricity at certain points. There were big holes in the wall, and you could see outside from them. And my mom put me out of the house one day because I was making too much noise. And I had my Super Nintendo that I had gotten for Christmas. Um, and I went to her house with it and asked if I could play it. So she must have had electricity. Um, I remember that she called it a Pinto because she couldn't even begin to understand what a Nintendo was. But I somehow got it working, hooked to her television. I'm 7 years old, and she brings me a can of peas, and she has poured sugar on them as a little snack. And I know how little she had. When I think of that moment, I know for me, there has to be something. I don't think that kind of love can occur in a meaningless universe. And my experience, even in writing and feeling this young kid speak to me, lets me know he exists. Maybe it's quantum physics, maybe it's spirituality, but whatever it is, it's bigger than this moment. And whatever it is, it reminds me that I am a tiny piece of color in a big tapestry, and I can't be removed from it, and neither can anyone else.
Amen. Amen. Talking about, this concept of something bigger than us and everything. You were also very marked on your poetry, especially your last poem. Holy cow, your last poem in the book. You were marked a lot by death, by suicide. Um, People around you, not only like, peers or anything, but students. Um, would you like to expand a little bit on how you feel about that and maybe, I don't know, like thoughts and recommendations or ideas for people to help support that?
Um, Absolutely. And thank you for asking the question. Um, and honestly, for being brave enough to talk about the last poem. I don't think I've ever had anyone, and this is 100 interviews in, talk about the last poem.
And let me tell you, I was just like bawling by the end. I mean, even just thinking about it, and I was like, oof.
Thank you. I had moments with students. We have apps called Remind that allow them to send messages to teachers. And in the last few years, on multiple occasions, um, those notes would come in the middle of the night, the goodbye note. Um, and we saved them every single time, and I'm grateful for that. But it made me realize how big this work was and how important this work was and how miserable some of these kids were. And that's when I started doing research and speaking out on this topic. And it's a narrative based problem because the reason in the United States and in many other countries, I don't mean to center the United States, it's just where I'm from. The reason that we don't talk about this is that one, the groomer narrative prevents us from talking about queer youth, because the single worst thing that you can say to someone is that they're the sort of person who hurts children. And so we have a group that will throw that word at anyone who talks about queer youth. And I think the other issue is that the prevailing narrative when we talk about LGBTQ suicidality, LGBTQ depression, anxiety, is to suggest that somehow being LGBTQ causes it. But we have really good research that's 50 years old at this point, from groups like GLSEN or the Trevor Project. And what we can see is that if you divide the lives of LGBTQ youth up into community, media, home, and school, and then you ask, is home an affirming place? Is school an affirming place? That level of anxiety, depression, and suicidality lowers when it's affirming. And when a queer kid is lucky enough to have an affirming home, in an affirming community, in an affirming school, and has access to affirming media, that level of suicidality is the same as their non-queer peers. So we know from really good research that being LGBTQ is not the cause. Homophobia and transphobia are the causes. That's one thing that I think we have to just keep working at. I did just some backwards research looking at things that we can do, things that we know will help LGBTQ. And it's like you can take every single one of these and just imagine how the laws that are happening right now will harm kids. LGBT, a reduction, each of these has a reduction of somewhere between 10 and 20% in suicidality. Having LGBTQ characters in films, having LGBTQ characters in books that they read, having a gay straight alliance or LGBTQ affirming club at their school. Those numbers rose from the 90s until the year 2016. The number of students who say that they have an LGBTQ club at school is now lower than in the 90s. We've lost 20 years in the last 10 years. Having access to a bathroom that they can feel dignity when going to. Having at least 4 teachers who they know support them. So much legislation that's happening seems intentional in causing stress. And the stress is significant in terms of its relationship to politics. 96% of LGBTQ youth in the United States say that politics makes them miserable. And something like 70% say that they feel consistently miserable.
Those are huge numbers.
Those are very huge numbers, and they're between half and 66% higher than for non-LGBTQ youth who themselves have high numbers. So that's one aspect of this, and the other aspect is that we know how to fix it, and yet we don't. It's the good thing is we do have an antidote, right? All these measures that we could do, and I think coming to terms with the fact that we're not going to do it quickly enough has been hard for me. One of the hardest things I think that I've experienced is that I learned that a child in Indiana was buried with my book. They were a first semester college student and had met me. And I signed the book. And in similar ways to what I felt as a teacher, that maybe I could save them all. I thought, what if I had written better words? But the pastor was very kind and called and said, maybe you wrote the words that kept them here longer. And that to me feels like a call for all of us. What words can we say to keep them all here longer until they feel some hope? And I think we have good reason for hope. Even in a dark moment, there's always good reason for hope.
Hope can be that one last light, right? People say it's the last thing we lose.
something I love about Spanish is the word esperar,
Mm.
the idea that we're just waiting and it's going to happen. Um,
And how that relates to esperanza, which is hope.
yeah, um, it it's something I think about a lot when I think about what hope means because I'm in the I'm in the line of work that makes me think about hope a lot.
You gotta
Um,
be hoping all the time, or else you get like
yes.
tired, tired, tired. Oof.
And yeah,
But
so that's something that Spanish gives me, the feeling that if I wait, it will come. It's going to happen.
and kind of like going with that into nowadays, and especially your statistics and what you were saying, how 10 years ago they started like going down again with everything. What do we do in this times of politics? Not only in the US, but I mean, with like Poland and Hungary, the like banned pride and everything, yet there we are showing up and more people showing up and allies. It feels daunting to be a minority during this time in the world, just in general, right? I mean, racial minority, gender, sexuality, all these different things, anything outside of the norm feels scary, feels threatening, feels unsafe. You mentioned, how, speaking up, being louder, providing this spaces and whatnot are important things. Are there, and I guess this can be related to the work that you're doing now, with K120, like what are some things that you would recommend our viewers right now, about what can we do? What are those hopes to keep the hope up, you know?
Mhm. The thing that helps me the most is remembering story. When I look back at my teenage years, I saw the United States government at the federal level pass a law that all of the conservative party and half of the liberal party voted to enforce, to get rid of gay marriage. I was alive to see two gay men arrested for being gay in Texas. I saw Ellen DeGeneres in the 90s have a little chicken peck kiss that led to her being canceled. Um, I saw all of these things, and within a 15-year period, I was married legally. Um, what's interesting is if you go look at primetime television during those times, in the first year, there were something like 14 LGBTQ main characters. If you look at the span of those 15 years, we have something like 427 LGBTQ characters. Um, Statistics don't help. Although the research shows that if someone believes something and you show them a statistic that proves them wrong, it will further entrench their belief. Politics won't help. There's the big beautiful bill,
Mm.
whatever that bill is called, will likely get rid of a lot of hospitals in the part of Kentucky that I'm from. We're looking at 35 probably being closed. And someone said in the comments of the local news article, anything that the other side says, I just assume is evil. And it had 1,000 likes.
Ugh,
So I don't even need to talk about the political side because it could have been either side that would say something like that. So
absolutely.
what it tells me is the moment that someone can categorize you as one thing or the other, um, it's going to be really hard for us to trust each other. Story is the only thing that can undo that. What's beautiful about what story does, I don't mean to get too philosophical, but
No,
there's a
please,
reason,
please.
there's a reason that infants don't remember things. We used to believe that children's brains weren't developed. Not true. Children's brains are absolutely developed, but memory is made of body. You have five senses. You see, you taste, you smell. You walk through the universe, and your body gets turned into expressions in your mind. And eventually, depending upon the sorts of expression things that your mind is holding, you start to tell stories. And in order to have a story, you have to have a narrative and you have to have meaning. And for meaning to happen, you have to be able to insert an ego. You have to be able to insert yourself and imagine yourself in their shoes, even your own shoes. children don't have developed senses of ego yet. And without ego, there can't be a story. That's how powerful they are. Even our ability to see the world. Narrative thinking theory says that 95% of what we think is thinking is just us telling ourselves stories. You look at me and I look at you, and we draw on either our experiences or other people's experiences. When their experiences become stories they tell us, right? So that's an act of communion. They're turning their body into a story, and I'm taking it into mine. So I think that is how we change things. We tell stories, as many stories as we can, as a big a variety as we can about each other, to each other, in all the ways that we can. For me, that means books, but it also means, when we talk about courage and fearlessness, for me, that can mean testifying before Congress or talking to the president or writing a book. Or it can also mean opening my heart and not being afraid to be emotional in this moment with you, right? But there are things I can't do. I was supposed to do a drag show next month for a place, for a local pride, and I really wanted to do it. But I have body issues. I have body image issues. And I also have a thing called, now my brain's not working, where I sweat because of anxiety, like in crazy
Uh-huh.
amounts, hyper something something. Anyway, I realized I can't do this. I can't do this. And I had to say I couldn't. So what I would say to anyone listening is, like, what's your drag show? And forgive yourself and say you don't have to do that. If the drag show is standing up at work, then don't stand up at work. But if you can talk to your family, your neighbors, if you can counter bad stories, and that can be really easily done. You don't have to shame people to counter their stories. If someone says, well, those gay people, they just want to change the country and undo marriage, you can say, well, I have some friends and they're really nice people. Like, you can just tell stories. I think, as much as I want to give some big answer that sort of fixes everything, I think that one's it. It's the stories.
Absolutely, and I think communication and it's all about like understanding a different point of view, a different perspective, and being welcoming to something that you don't know or you're not used to, and that allows you to open your mind in different ways. Willie, this has been such an incredible conversation. I'm so glad that we were able to take this hour to not only talk about your book, but about yourself and your thoughts. And thank you for that advice of, sharing stories, the power of the word. Super, super important. I would like to ask you one last question before we close this. And this is something that we ask all our guest authors, is what is your definition of compassion, or what do you believe for compassion to be?
Um, I'll answer it from my definition of advocacy. Um, there's a bunch of words in Latin for to call, but vocare means to use your voice, um, specifically. And ad means that the voice is going out. So when I think about advocacy, I think about recognizing someone in need and being willing to stay with them and call for help. And what that also means is believing help will come. So for me, compassion is a bridge between that person who needs help and your hopeful belief that if you stay with them and call for it, it will come. Compassion has to do with our belief in what all of humanity is. And I can say, as an author, as someone who was able to basically do everything I've wanted to do in life. And this is not magical positivity or anything like that, because I'm not talking about the things that I want. I'm talking about the people who mattered. Am I trying to do it? What I have found is people really want to help. I talked at the beginning about how my students won a $10,000 grant. And these students learned that a student in another school had died by suicide. And they immediately wanted to give half of their books to that school, because of course they did. That school in a neighboring county took the books and was very happy. And the school that my students attended, which I no longer worked at this point, once the funds were there, actually refused to take all of their books. Um, I wanted to advocate because I had compassion for these kids, and I knew we cannot tell young people a hopeless story. So I put out a little tiny ad on change.org or something like that. I think it was change.org, and said, we're looking for $400 so that we can mail books to anyone who needs them. And then I put out word in my community, does anyone have a space where maybe we could have some books? I got lots of offers, and eventually an art center downtown created the Rainbow Freedom Library. We asked for $400 and we got $7,000 in donations in about a
Amazing.
week. Um, and now we have this big, gorgeous LGBTQ freedom library that all of the kids in town can go to. And we have extra money so that if anyone else needs the books but can't get to them, we can send them. On top of that, we've now opened 4 other Rainbow Freedom Libraries in the state in different places. So this is how compassion works for me. When you care enough about other people and believe, when you care enough about the person who needs care and believe enough in other people to ask for help, I think you become the bridge.
Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And what a way to end this conversation. Willie, thank you so much for joining us, for writing this incredible book, for the example that you give, and for the work that you're constantly doing with advocacy. And what a beautiful way to describe compassion. Um, so thank you for that time. I wanted to
It,
take just 2 minutes to let people know about all the things that are happening with the Charter for Compassion really quickly. So we have our Harmony of Humanity webinar that is happening every Wednesday throughout July. We will take a break in August. Kitchen table chat for healthcare sector. If you have any health initiatives that you would like the charter to be more aware of so that we can provide it to our compassionate cities around the world. It's the first Friday of every month. Since this Friday is 4th of July, which is US Independence Day, we will have this meeting next Friday, the 11th. Our EdNet forum is with WeArm, the Palestinian Conflict Resolution Transformation Center, and this has been rescheduled now to July 17th at 7:30 a.m. Pacific time. And we have our Sangha, which is the last Saturday of every month at 9 a.m. Pacific time, a time to reflect, a time to meditate, a time to share. Our next global read is going to be banning landmines, disarmament, citizen diplomacy, and human security. And this is with Nobel Peace Laureate Jody Williams, and Archbishop Desmond Tutu was part of the writing there. And the facilitator is Joe Ngoma, who has been our facilitator later before. We have Alice in Action chats with other places, geographically speaking, New Zealand and Australia on August 20th, the US on August 20th as well, and UK chat as well on August 20th. You can check out all the videos from our Compassion Action Conference that happened back in May. You can sign up to receive all the recordings. And last but not least, The Spirit of Ubuntu, the film documentary that the Charter for Compassion was able to provide support. And it's now available on Bing TV and YouTube. My friends, Willie, thank you so much for this time. I hope that the people that are watching this either now or later on can feel not only the inspiration, but the power and compassion that you provide. So thank you so much.